Hi, I'm Fran. I'm the host of The Road to Shalom. For those of you who've been with me for a while on this journey, I'm truly glad to be back. And for those of you who are new to the road we're on, this podcast is dedicated to kind of exploring the way things are supposed to be, how and why they're not, and just how we might find our way back on that road. You know, I know for sure that I don't have to tell any of you that things aren't the way they're supposed to be. In fact, things aren't the way they used to be either, are they? We've all been inundated with more data than we can handle, more misinformation than we can fact check, and countless hilarious memes about something that in itself actually isn't very funny at all. We've all had some shared experiences during our sheltering in place also, like an unprecedented use of the word unprecedented. And most of us have also endured the painfully time-stopping, often boring, and absolutely overused tool with the oxymoronic name of Zoom. And from this time forward, none of us will ever think of scuba diving when we hear the word face mask, or think first that Corona is a beer choice during Cinco de Mayo. And we'll all know what PPE stands for, even though most of us might not know what PVC stands for. Make no mistake, as a guy who's going to be 70 in a couple months, I gotta say that in my lifetime, COVID-19 will be right up there with Halley's Comet, once in a lifetime sort of stuff. At least I hope that's the case. Okay, just for the record, I know that I sort of dropped off the planet after the last episode of this podcast, but to be fair, none of you checked in on me to see if I was even alive, so I think we're even. Back in March, we were in the middle of a series exploring how the American church wandered off the road to shalom. And just so you know, I'm planning on getting us back into that series very soon. But in the meantime, I really felt like it would be prophetically timely to throw a few thoughts your way that I think are important, perhaps even essential. All right? Okay, so let's jump in. I want to begin with a pithy comment made by a 10th century Hebrew named Koholeth. He said, "It's better to be in the house of mourning than to be in the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will take it to heart." Or maybe to modernize it, it's better to be at a funeral service than a restaurant, because that's where we're all headed, no exceptions. You know, funerals aren't speed bumps for most of us. They're kind of more like, pull the car over, turn off the engine, stop, think about life, think about death, think about what I want to hear when I'm eulogized. And to tell you, as a teacher who had 14 students or former students die in a 14-year span, I also know that people tend to leave the house of mourning relatively unaffected. We all basically want to just pull our car back on life's highway and get back into sixth gear. But this pandemic has landed all of us in the house of mourning. It's impossible to identify a single person, place, or thing that has not felt the sting of this invisible enemy. I mean, it's just flat out impossible. The whole planet is living under siege. We're all captives with very little freedom, submerged beneath unending reports of deaths, disorder, and division. The American dream has been quarantined, and humanity's in this together, perhaps maybe even like never before. But what about us? I mean, what about the people of the book? What about people of faith? What's going to be our story when this chapter ends? What will we have learned for real? Well, unfortunately, beloved, the jury's in on that one. And let's just kind of say that the biblical narrative doesn't paint us as the sharpest knives in the drawer when it comes to paying attention. And probably the best passage on our tendency to just flat miss the point when God's working really hard to make one is Yeshua's answer to the Pharisees in Matthew 16:3. He basically says, you guys are great at predicting the weather based on what you can see, but you are totally inept when it comes to figuring out what God's doing right in front of you. Okay, so why bring these verses into our discussion about COVID-19, the pandemic, and all this? Well, beloved, I'm concerned that we too might be missing what's been set before us, or maybe even gifted to us by God. Now, for the record, I'm not even remotely suggesting that God's the author of all this, but this hot mess is global. And for that reason, he's in it for sure, even though his return address isn't on the package that brought it to us. I want to play just a bit with another word that's become a mandatory component of all daily news and dialogue, right along with the word unprecedented, and that's the word Zoom. During the past 8 weeks or so, toilet paper and flour have been zooming off the shelves, and people have been zooming to Zoom. We have Zoom meetings for everything from family dinners to the Supreme Court, from book clubs to Passover Seders. Now listen. Don't mishear me here. I'm not a Zoomophile or a Zoomophobe, and I've only made a couple visits to Zoomopolis myself. Zoom's been a great asset, perhaps on the level of a blessing, honestly, for many people in a ton of situations. But in all our Zooming, I fear we're doing very little blooming, if I could kind of try to be a little poetic. And I've got a couple very provocative thoughts from a wide variety of writers and ears that I'd like to kind of lay out on our table in this episode, and then try to piece them together into a picture that I really hope will be helpful to any of you within the sound of my voice. And the first piece for our little puzzle on the table is from Sherry Turkle. She's a veteran professor at MIT, and she wrote a book, Alone Together, Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other. And in that book, Turkle says this: "My own study of the network life has left me thinking about intimacy, about people being with people in person, hearing their voices and seeing their faces, trying to know their hearts. And it has left me thinking also about solitude, the kind that refreshes and restores. Loneliness is failed solitude. To experience solitude, you must be able to summon yourself by yourself. Otherwise, you will only know how to be lonely." Now, I want to replay that last idea for you. Loneliness is failed solitude. To experience solitude, you must be able to summon yourself by yourself. Otherwise, you will only know how to be lonely. You know, beloved, I think there's a lot of us that have mistaken an opportunity for solitude as the threat of loneliness. And if we have, it's because we've not experienced or pursued solitude before. The pandemic has made us manic for connection with people. But what if God purposes at least part of it to be an opportunity to learn how to recognize and pay attention to His voice? What if He really wants a little less zooming and a lot more blooming, at least when it comes to our own soul care? All right? Second piece, the second idea is ancient, not modern, from about 800 years before Yeshua, to be exact. In the book of 1 Kings, we hear of this encounter that this crazy guy named Elijah, this prophet, had with Yahweh in the wilderness. Elijah kind of had his own pandemic going, and his pandemic was in the form of a queen named Jezebel. And she had just posted on Instagram that she was going to nail his rear end to the garage wall within 24 hours. So Elijah quarantined himself in a desert cave, depressed and not really too hopeful. And then suddenly, all around Elijah, there were bone-rattling noises. I mean, loud noises. We're talking rocks cracking and splitting from a powerful wind. Then there was an earthquake shaking Elijah's very feet, and finally an explosive fire from heaven. Then after all the noise stilled and the dust had settled, we're told there was a fourth noise, if you could even really call it a noise. The Hebrew words that describe it, they call it a thin silence, or perhaps a gentle and subdued voice. And you want to know something amazing? Elijah recognized this thin silence. He recognized it. It was familiar to him. He had heard it before. And he recognized it as the voice of Yahweh, the voice of God. So what does he do? I mean, what would you do? Elijah walked out of the cave to talk with God. Now I want you to hold on to that thought, because I need to put another puzzle piece on the table here. Another Hebrew poet we only know as one of the sons of Korah gives us our third idea in Psalm 46. He says this: "Be still and know that I am God." Now, beloved, the verb for being still is really pretty beautiful. Kind of carries within it the idea of letting go, kind of dropping your arms to your sides, or the picture of a bird folding its wings, kind of to relax, to quit spending all your energy. Kind of like the difference between Martha smashing away in the kitchen while Mary had stilled herself at the feet of Jesus. And I wonder if there's a relationship between the two verbs in this tiny little verse, between the verb being still and the verb knowing, between being still and knowing that God is God. Or let me push this idea in a little more till it gets a little uncomfortable. If we're not still, can God still be God, at least to us? Does it take stillness for everything that's not God to fall off our shelf of importance, and so that he's the only thing up there? Elijah was quarantined for sure, but he also knew how to be still. And in his stillness, in the absence of competing noise, he could listen and hear a familiar thin silence, the voice of Yahweh. And as a result, Elijah knew that God was God and that Jezebel was not. How about us? Do we? Do you? One final puzzle piece here. About 35 years ago, the late Henry Nouwen made a profound statement that kind of weaves together Turkel, Elijah, and the sons of Korah. Nouwen said this. He said, "A life without a lonely place, that is, a life without a quiet center, easily becomes destructive." Beloved, in all our Zooming, all our WebExing, all our Google Hangouting, all our FaceTiming, and all our Microsoft grouping, where is our quiet center? Is our fear of being alone really a misplaced, misunderstood fear of being lonely because we don't understand the difference? Is it a testimony that we don't understand the value and the place of solitude in the life of faith? Do we understand the difference between loneliness and solitude? Do we want to? God made a sobering judgment and a lavish promise through the lips of Isaiah that speaks to our Zoom and doom culture right now. God said this, "Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Listen to me and eat what is good, and your soul will delight in the riches of fare. Incline your ear and come to me. Hear me, that your soul may live." God tells his people that they're living lives of frenzy and unfulfillment. 3 times in this tiny passage, God points to himself. He invites his people to listen, to incline their ear, to hear. Why? What does God want for his people? He tells them. He tells us. He wants our soul to live. And beloved, in this little passage, the Hebrew word Shema is in these 2 verses 3 times. It's the word we translate hear. We think of it as listen. But the most vital thing to get right here is that in the Hebrew world, it was assumed we would listen because it was God who was talking. God is inviting his people to pay attention to him, to be still, and to know that he is God, to stop paying attention to the winds, to the earthquakes and the fires, and to start straining to hear that thin, gentle voice so that we can learn to recognize it when it comes. When this pestilence has passed, beloved, and I'm quite sure life will not be the same. It will be familiar, but the landscape each of us finds ourselves walking within will be very different forever. How are we going to be different? Are we going to tell our children and grandchildren how we coped during the pandemic? Or are we going to tell them what we discovered? What if you were able to tell others, to tell your posterity, how you learned to recognize God's thin voice? What if you were able to tell them you learned how to listen during the pandemic? What if during all our social distancing, we actually drew closer to God? James tells us that if we draw near to God, he will draw near to us. Beloved, social distancing isn't necessary with God. He's not sick. But I have to tell you, he might be contagious in a good way. So I'd like to nudge you into some quiet spaces for the next couple weeks. Take some time, journal, walk alone and think. Read some scripture. You could start with Psalm 3 or Isaiah 41 or Romans 8. They're great places to begin. In the world of Zoom, create some room for the one who rejoices over you with singing. Shalom.